Good evening, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of our Salesforce Platform App Builder. And today we're going to be looking into business logic and process automation. Before we start, I would like to go through the curriculum to guide you through what we're doing and why we are doing this. According to Salesforce guideline, we've done Salesforce fundamentals. Some items I did not treat because it's quite basic and you can just read it up yourself. For instance, Chatted. Yesterday, we treated how to build data models, and some items, again, I probably did not touch, and that's the data loading into the system. You already have understanding of how to import data and export data out of the system. If you don't, please try to read watch the admin video for an overview of how to do that. Again, everything we're going to be doing today, you probably know or you're aware of. If I'm not touching certain things, please try to understand that we've done them before and it's going to be a repetition of what we've done. However, today, I'm just going to give you an overview and I'm going to touch a bit of technical side of process automation. And hopefully, at the end of the day, we understand how to build simple business logic and process automation in Salesforce. So I'm just going to go into the requirement, this is meant to be process automation. So basically, we're going to be going through roll-up summary, the formula fields, the validation rules, the approval process. We're also going to be going through workflow, flow and process builder, and business process automation. So basically, what we want to find out is how to approach things when we're given challenges at work. So if you are asked to do certain things, what process automation or what automation tools would you use to achieve that? Would you start creating flow if you're asked to just update a simple field? Would you start creating process builder? Or would you start creating a flow if you have to create a record? Yes, flow might be comfortable for certain people, but then again, you still need to use you need to minimize the use of complex tools to solve a problem. Having said that, Salesforce is pushing everything that you guys are doing right now in Salesforce into they're trying to recommend flows. So my recommendation would be, if you feel comfortable using flow or the business does not have any preference in terms of approach to do things, then use flow to achieve this. Okay. So having said that, let's go into the basics of roll-up summary and formula fields. Why do we have roll-up summary and why do we use formula fields? So essentially, these fields are very important because it makes things easier. It's like the first automation tool. Most people might not understand why it's an automation tool, but if you have a formula fields, whatever you want can be automatically processed. So if you want to create a due date based on created date, if business asks you, if a project is submitted, the due date, or if a project is created, the due date should be 7 days from the date it was created. This is an automation, okay? So you don't have to use a process builder, a workflow, or the kind of tools which you know as automation tools in Salesforce. You can actually use just a simple formula that checks the current dates, then adds 7 days to the current dates. You could achieve that using workflow, but that would be overkilling the question, okay? So formula fields, what are they? This is a read-only field that derives its value from a formula expression you define, okay? The formula field is updated when any of the source fields change. So what does that mean? It means that if you create a formula field based on a particular field, in as much as you've created that field and the formula displays the results, if you edit the value of the field that is driving the formula, then the value of the formula field will change. So if you change the created date, or if you change a particular date field, don't expect the due date to remain constant. The due date will change as a result of you changing the field that is driving that formula. Okay? These fields are updated in real time and automatically. So you don't have to do anything. You don't even have to refresh. Once you get away from a page or once you update a particular field in real time, the other formula field will be updated. And there are kind of formula expression functions you can use to create a formula field. For instance, you can use date and time. You can use logical, math, and even the test syntax to transform a particular string into, or a particular number into a test field and the likes. In addition to that, you can create simple formula fields, formulas such as add, subtract, or concatenation. You can also create an advanced formula like you guys saw in your project using the if-else statement. So the formula field is powerful. You might not see it as an automation tool, but it is an automation tool in Salesforce. So when they ask you to do something, always think, can a formula actually achieve this? Okay? Aside that, you have what they call the cross-object formulas. The cross-object formula is unique because it is across a particular object. So if you have two objects that are related together, you can derive a formula based on the relationship. You have the bill item. You can drive a formula from the bill item. You can drive a formula field on the bill based on the values of the bill item, or whichever way. But remember, it's always parent, child, 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 okay? And you can merge two fields together to create a merge fields. In addition to that, you can have what they call up to 10 relationships. What does that mean? It means that if I have an invoice, I have an hospital, I can even have order, I can have anything. So the relationship can go 10 down up to 10 relationships. Okay, we're going to see an example of a formula field shortly. Let's go to setup, and we just quickly go to any object. I'll rather use a custom object that we know that has relationships. Okay, this bill object, we know the bill object has relationship with customer, and the bill object has relationship with a user. And it has, those two relationships are sufficient enough for us to create a formula field. So why are we creating this formula field? For instance, I want to be able to find out the customer phone number on the bill, or something that is associated based on the relationship. So the first thing is you select the formula as the data type, okay? And the next thing is you determine the return value for that formula. So the return value is very important because you cannot have a particular formula. You cannot add, for instance, a number and a text together. So if you are expecting a return type of a number, then you should be adding numbers. If you're expecting a return type of a date, then you should be adding dates, or you should be doing some logic around dates. So the type of return type you're expecting and the type of feed you're trying to generate a formula from should determine what you're selecting here. Okay, so for this, let's just select number for a start, and we go to next. And you can see you have the simple formula, which helps you to insert the field, and you have the advanced formula that helps you do other advanced stuff. So the simple formula is just when you have the bill, and it goes into looking for the bill fields, okay, which is very basic. But if you want the advanced stuff, you can go into cross object. The cross object is now a case of I have bill, but I know that bill is related to a customer. According to the relationship, I can get all the details of the customer based on the bill objects. And if you can see in the schema diagram, which we discussed yesterday, you can see the relationship between the bill and the customer. This is what makes it possible to do a cross-object formula field. Okay, so I just want to show the relationship again so we can see the relationship between the bill and the customer. The relationship is a master detail, okay? Because we have a relationship, we can do what? We can get customer information inside the bill, okay? So now let's see that we have this and we go to phone, okay? This is how to insert a phone number into the bill object, even though this phone number is coming from the customer field. The reason why we can do that is because of the relationship. Now let's go back to the customer. If you go to the customer and you try to create a formula from the customer, I select formula, next. I just say maybe, I don't know, bill something. Okay, and I put a test field and I go next. I go to advanced and I go to next, customer. You cannot see a bill here, okay? You cannot see a bill here. So what does that tell me? It tells me that if I want to create a formula, I can pull that formula I can pull details of my masters I can pull details of the masters into the child, but it has to be going down. It has to be going down. That means if I want to get a relationship that is associated with customer, which is a plan, I can also create that, but as you can see, it is a lookup, okay? It is a lookup, meaning that I can get plan information when I'm in customer, okay? So if you are in customer, you can go to plan and get the information of a plan. This is how to create formula. The relationship determines, this is how to create a cross-object formula. The relationship you have determines what you can pull out. So what I meant, or what we meant that by 10 relationship is if we have this and the bill is going to bill item, which we have bill item, okay? So if I am on a bill item, I should be able to go to bill, I should be able to go to customer. So let's see that. I go to the bill item. I go to formula and let's just say customer, okay? I want to get the phone number of the customer, okay? And I call it number, next, advance. Then I go to bill item. Then I go to bill. Then I will go to customer, okay? So this is what they call the 10 deep, 10 relationship. So you can keep going as long as you have a relationship between the objects, okay? So that's the benefit of cross-object formula. And one thing you should also know is that you can use it for master or lookup. As you can see, this is a lookup relationship. The blue line is a lookup, and this is a master relationship. So it doesn't matter whether it is master or lookup, you can still do a cross-object formula, okay? So let's go into the use case of formula. The use case of formula is very simple. I can calculate the difference between dates. What does that mean? I've been asked to find or create a due date. Let's say we want to create a due date on the bill item object. No, let's go to the bill because the bill would have a logical reason to have a due date, right? New fields, and I call it due date, which I want it to be a formula. Due date, okay, and I'm gonna call it date. And I'll say due date of a bill is 7 days after it has been created. So the first thing I need to look for is the created date of this bill, which is this on the Salesforce object. It's a standard field on the Salesforce object. So I insert it, and I want the due date to be 7 days from now. So now I've created a formula and I've created an automation that helps me to calculate a due date without having to write a workflow rule, a process builder, logic, or whatsoever. It is that straightforward when you are building automation in Salesforce. So if you look at what else we can do, we can find the month from a date. You can even add months for a date. In order to do all this, you can check the Salesforce formula. The Salesforce formula gives you everything you need in terms of what formula or how to construct a formula. Never memorize anything in Salesforce. You just need to know where to go. The help.salesforce.com would help you to find anything you need for executing or manipulating anything in Salesforce. So if I'm looking for months, add months. So returns a number, January 12th, in a number format given date. So I click on it and it's going to give me the approach, the way to do it. So let me look for months. Okay, so what it's saying is that I can just grab months in front of any date and I'm going to get the month of that date. So if I go back to my field and I say formula, today's month, current month. Okay, I say current month and I say it's a number. Then I have months, then created dates. Okay, created dates. Check. So incorrect parameter, type for months. Expected date, received date time. Okay, so created date is a date time, whereas month is expecting a date. Okay, is expecting a date. So you have to be very careful when you are creating the data type for a start, and based on that data type, you can now get the date, the month. So right now, we need to pass in a date, and the created date, which we're passing, is a date time value. So what we can do is we can probably look for other fields that can give us a date, or we can actually just create our own created date, which obviously is just, okay, let's use end dates. Okay, I think end date is a date time, so that's fine. Then you check. Okay, as you can see, end date is a date, and we can easily get the months from the end dates. So let's click on next and see the outcome of that on the bill layout. So if you go back to the Salesforce and go to the bill, you should be able to see the months, the current months on the bill. Okay, you should be able to see the current month on the bill. And obviously, we shouldn't be making it, so the current month, obviously, is not what we expected it to be, but because the end date was created in February, that's why it's saying the current month is 2. But obviously, it's going to be maybe the end date month or something like that. Anyway, whatever you're looking for, you can find it as long as you know how to read the documentation. So as a developer, you will learn, or you should learn, how to read documentation, because everything you want to do, there is an example for it. If I want to give preference based on the city, user city, I can say if user city equals this is the value. Maybe I want to add a tax rate for a discount or for whatever calculation I'm doing. If user city equals Nepal, this is the tax rate. If it is Lagos, this is the tax rate. If it is California, this is the tax rate, okay? This is how to write the if-else statement, and it is something you will copy and paste. You don't need to memorize how to write an if-else statement. You don't need to memorize how to write an if-else logic, especially in Salesforce. When you're writing a formula, you can just copy this and build upon this. One of the issue or one of the challenges you will make as you're going to have as a developer is how to find out if you've used all the right brackets. Okay, you'll be asking yourself, is this okay? How many brackets do I need to do? Okay, as a developer, what you can do is you can go to formatter. Okay, everything you're writing as a formatter. There is what they call the HTML formatter, whereby you can format your code. So if you have a very rough code, or maybe you feel like you've made a mistake and you don't know where the mistake is coming from, go to HTML formatter and you paste in your code and you click on format HTML. If it is not HTML, go to JavaScript formatter. If it is not JavaScript, go to SQL formatter. So anytime you're writing a code, you can format that code and see where the error is coming from. This is just one website, but there are so many websites out there. Okay, let's go back to the Salesforce. What else can you do with the formula field? You can display a link with the formula field. How do you display a link with the formula field? The same way we display the if-else statement, the same way we display everything we want, we can just look for link. Okay, we can look for hyperlink. And if you click on hyperlink, it will give you an approach or a way of writing hyperlink in Salesforce. Okay, so let me see that. What is the hyperlink? This is add, subtract, multiply. And this is the hyperlink, okay? I know this might looks a bit like complex to you guys, but what this is saying is that this is the URL you want to direct a user to. And this is what you want people to see, to click on. This is what you want people to click on. And what action do you want them to create? What action do you want what you want Salesforce to do when that button is clicked? For instance, if you go to the object, you can go to buttons, links, and action, and you can create new button or new link. You can do this using the buttons or link, or you can create it using a formula. So what does that mean? It means if I want to have a button here whereby I can click and direct user to a website, I can create that using this new button or link. Alternatively, I can create a new field and create an hyperlink in that field, and that hyperlink will be placed somewhere here. Okay, and once they click on that link, it will take them either to a different record or to an external website. Okay, you can achieve that using a formula. Okay, Salesforce gives you that privilege. One thing you should now know is that with a formula field, you cannot search a formula field. You cannot use long text area, encrypted, or description fields for a formula field. What does that mean? If you are creating a formula, the options you get is this. There is no encryption, there is no long text, it's just a normal text, and there is no encrypted text, there is no long text, and there's no description fields. Okay, so you should be aware of that. Yesterday we talked about description fields and how it helps the internal people to find out why you created that field. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go into, again, field reference in a formula cannot be deleted. Okay, have this at the back of your mind. Once you create a formula for a particular object, you cannot delete that field reference. Otherwise, unless Salesforce will stop you, because it's going to tell you that that field is referenced in a formula. So you need to, first of all, delete that field before you can delete whatever field you want to delete. For instance, we know that end date is referenced in our current months. Okay, let's try to delete this end date. It's going to tell you that this is referenced somewhere. Okay, it is referenced in the custom formula field. That's why it's not going to let you delete it. Okay, so always know the limitations of whatever you're doing. Based on that limitation, you now start suggesting what other tool or automation you can use to achieve what you're trying to achieve. Let's go further into roll-up summary. A roll-up summary field display the sum, mean, max value of a field in a related list, or the record count of all records listed in a related list. What does that mean? It means that if you have an object, inside the object, you have what they call related. Related is the objects that are related to the primary objects. Looking at this schema, this is the bill. This is the related list, related object to the bill. This is the customer. This is the related object to the customer. Similarly, you can have related on even a lookup. Okay, so now what roll-up summary is doing is it is calculating the sum. Okay, if I want to calculate all the bill items on this bill, how do I calculate it? As you can see, we have 9 bill items on this bill. Okay, you can now create a field on the bill that will give you the total bill items on this bill. You achieve that using the roll-up summary. The reason why you can do a roll-up summary is because there is a relationship between the objects. There is a relationship between the bill and the bill item. And if you look at how do you create that, you can create that because there is not just a relationship, there is a master detail relationship. This is very important. You can only create a roll-up summary when you have a master detail relationship. There are some exceptions. The exception is some standard object relationship. Remember the account and opportunity. They don't have that kind of master detail relationship. So let me click this and show you. And show you accounts. And we have opportunity. Okay. Can you see the kind of relationship between account and opportunity? But yet, we can have a roll-up summary. Okay. This is what the Salesforce refers to as special relationship. They created it specially for users to be able to work together with an account and opportunity. But for other cases, it has to be a master detail relationship. There's also products. So if you look at products, you have other products, okay? And there's opportunity products. You can still do a roll-up summary between opportunity and opportunity product. This is a special type of relationship, okay? So understand that even though roll-up summary is between master detail relationship, but Salesforce has some special kind of relationship that you can use for roll-up summary when it comes to specific objects, okay? And you can add this to the page layouts, the views, and the reports, okay? You can add your roll-up summary values or fields to the views, the page layout, and the reports. So let me quickly explain this again in case you guys are wondering. The sum will sum the value. This is different from counts. The counts will count the number of items. If you have 9 bill items, it's going to be 9 bill items. Okay, it's going to be 9 bill items. But if you want to sum the total bill, it's going to be sum 500 plus whatever cost is in the other bill item and the likes. So sum is adding the value of a field, whereas count is counting the number of records we have in the related. So try to understand the difference. So let's quickly just count number of bills using a roll-up summary. We select a roll-up summary and we go to next, count of bill item, okay? Then you have the bill item. You can only select the related item, okay? If you select count, you don't have to do any aggregation. But if you select sum, you can now select what field to sum up to get you the value you're trying to put in that field. One thing you need to notice that this value cannot be edited, okay? With a formula as well, you cannot edit this value. It is automatically calculated. It's an automation, okay? Automation is how can I solve a problem or how can I solve a challenge without manually having to touch it. I don't want to touch anything. I want it to be solved and hand over to the user or to the business. Okay, so understand that. In addition, one thing you need to understand is that when you are using this out of the box, the calculation will be based on all the items present in that related object. However, if you have filters, you have a criteria that you want to eliminate from the process, then you can find out, okay, if this bill item does not have call duration, then do not let us calculate it. Do not let us sum it up. Or you can say if it is greater than certain amount. I can say if the bill item or if the call duration is greater than 100, then I want to find out the count of the bill item. I want to find out the count of all bill items that have a call duration greater than 100. This is a business challenge. You don't need to write a workflow rule. You don't need to write a process builder or a flow to solve that. You just need to use the roll-up summary out of the box. So when you're asked to develop a simple solution, don't think because you know workflow rule, you know process builder, or you know flows, then you go straight into those automation. Start from the basics, the roll-up summary, the formula, then you go into advanced automation if you cannot achieve them with the basic automation tools. So what are the things you need to know regarding roll-up summary limits? One thing you need to know is that you can max up to 25 roll-up fields per object. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that I can create as many roll-up fields to a max of 25 fields. Okay, so when you're designing a solution and you realize that you're going to be having a lot of roll-up summary fields, think critically before you start, because once you have 25, you cannot go further. You might be able to write an Apex that will just do that solution for you in one page. You don't have to use roll-up summary. With Apex, you can write a sum function and the likes by just writing a for loop that will loop through a build items, and it's going to be adding that build items into a particular field, okay? Number 2, not available on lookups. That means you cannot use a roll-up summary on a lookup relationship, which I already explained to you. Again, number, currency, percent fields are available on for some calculations. What does that mean? It means if you're creating a roll-up summary, the sum, you can only use it on certain fields. The main, you can only use it on certain fields. Can you see? There are more options when we select the main. The max can only be used on certain fields. What is the difference between the main and the max? The main is the minimum value in these records. So if you have a bill and you have bill items, let me try to bring the cost into this view. Okay, I'll go to the bill item, the bill object, go to page layout, and I go to related, and I go to bill item, I go to the gear icon, then I put the cost, okay? Let me put duration as well. And I think I'm okay. So I click on okay, I save, and I refresh this. So I wanted to explain to you what's the min max is, okay? So we don't have costs in certain items, but if you have cost in all these items, the min of this cost is $10, and the max of this cost is $500. So the min would only look for the minimum cost in the bill item. It's going to be looking through all these bills, and it's only going to select the minimum cost. The max is going to select the maximum cost. If you want to find the average of this cost, you need to sum it together, everything, then you divide it by the count. That means you need 2 things. You need the sum of all the costs, and you need the count of all the costs. A formula field will now be created to divide the value of those 2 fields to get the average of the bill item. That is how you solve problem. You don't need to create a workflow or process builder in order to solve that. In addition, you cannot add auto numbers. This is very important. So if you add a field called 1, 2, 3 as a bill item number, you cannot add those auto number because they were automatically generated by Salesforce. So you need to understand that if you have a new bill item and these are auto-generated numbers, you cannot add them together. You cannot perform the min max on them, okay? Also, you cannot find the max of today of a date field that is dynamic. What are dynamic date fields? Dynamic date fields are now, today. If you created one field right now, which is go to new fields, and you create a field for this date, which is today. Okay, today's date. Today's date. Okay, we have a field called today's date, and the formula dates. No, I want to use formula. Okay, it's date, and the formula is today. Okay, this is a dynamic value, because this value right now would be different from the value of today would change tomorrow. Okay, the value of today will change tomorrow. The fact that the value of today will change tomorrow makes it dynamic. So we cannot find the max of today. We cannot find the min of today. So remember, when you are creating roll-up summary, you have limitations, but you need to be aware of those limitations. Okay, so now let's go into automation. Again, we're still under automation. You guys might probably think automation is about workflow and flow. No, automation, validation rules is also part of automation. Why is it part of automation? Validation rules ensures that you enter the right data, or the user enters the right data. Okay, validation rules verifies that the data of a user enters in a record meets the standards you specify before the user can save. This is very important. Before the user can save this record, you need to verify the record. And that is an automation. Business can ask you, do not let anyone save a record if the start date is not specified. In as much as you don't see that as an automation, you would not have to manually check this record all the time. You want to put an automation in place, a process in place that checks this. Okay? You want to put a process in place that checks this, and that is what they call validation rules. Validation rules ensure that the data you are entering into the system is clean, consistent, and it is valid. Okay? One thing you should know about validation rule is that its response is a Boolean, true or false. So if you go to validation rules on the objects, you go to the particular object of interest, then you go to validation rules. Validation rules helps you to validate what goes on the bill objects. This is how it works. This thing you're entering here must be true for validation rule for the error to appear. So let me explain. If you want to make sure that start date is always entered in the system, then you need to write an expression here that ensures that the start date is not entered in the system. So this item you're writing here, you're going to say start date, okay, is empty, or start date is maybe whatever you want to put, but you want to make sure that it is true. Okay, if the start date is not true, then this would go true. So you want to say bill start date not equal to null, or bill start date is not empty, or something like that. So you might want to use maybe what they call the functions. Okay, the functions helps you to determine what to put. So right now it says blank value, expression substitute. So if there is a blank value, what do you want to check? Check whether expression is blank and return the substitute expression if it is blank. This is also a very good validation rule. The validation rule that checks if something is blank, and it helps you to put a value there if it is blank. Again, if you want to find out whatever function you are trying to use, the help.salesforce.com would help you achieve that. Go to the formula on the help.salesforce.com and read what the formula says. Determine if an expression has a value and returns a substitute expression if it doesn't. If expression has a value, returns the value of the expression. So if you say, if department is not given, then create this. So let's say we have a field called, I don't know, whatever the field is, let's say due date. If the due date is not present, the due date will now be a start date plus 5. So that is the function of the blank value. But remember, for your validation rule, you want to be making sure that an expression is true, okay? So you don't use this, you use this mostly in formulas, okay? So validation rule just kind of like checks what is happening, what kind of data are you entering? And based on that data entry, you can create an error. You have two ways of creating a validation error. The first one is, so let's use start date, okay? Start dates, or let's just say end dates. End dates equals to today, okay? End dates cannot be equals to today. You have two options where you want to display the error. When you're entering this value, you can display the error just at the top of this field, or you can display the error just right here. This is what it's telling you. Where do I want to display this error? Okay, I save, but I need to give it a check end dates, validation. When you are developing any application and you're developing an enterprise application, they will ask you to do all this, okay? To ensure that whatever you are entering into the system is valid. So now you have this, you can refresh this, and you can try to make end date equals today. And what's today? Today is April 6. It's going to tell you end date cannot be equal to today, okay? Alternatively, you can put this validation, you can put the validation error just right at the top of the field. One thing I want to show you is this. You can also use validation based on the user that is entering the system. So you can go to user and say, profile of that user. Profile ID, if you know the profile ID, but I want to go to something that I can easily pull. Profile name. Okay, profile name equals system administrator. Okay, so you can actually check if the profile name equals system administrator. And you can put an error, meaning that if an admin is trying to create maybe an opportunity, or an admin is trying to give himself a discount, ensure that an admin cannot do that. You can check profile name. So you can check anything you want. You don't necessarily have to be checking the field of an object. You can also check label. You can check organization details, you can check profile, you can check system and the likes, okay? Validation rule is an automation tool that ensures that the data a user enters in the system meets the standard you specify, okay? You can do this on any object, whether it is standard or custom. In addition to that, validation rule prevents a record from being saved. That's the key thing. It prevents the record from being saved. So it doesn't kind of like override anything. It just prevents it from being saved. And lastly, make sure that whenever you create a validation rule, you have to make it active for it to work. So if validation rule is not active, it's not going to work. Okay? What is the benefit of this? The benefit of this is this. If you are trying to import data, if I go to data import wizard and I'm trying to import data and I know that certain data will fail because the data maybe has some issues, or maybe okay, you're saying dates cannot be greater than this and that, right? Maybe there would be an issue importing that data. For instance, when I gave you the project, some people were unable to import the data because the date was not valid. What they could have just done is go to the validation rule and disable the validation rule, okay? They will just disable the validation rule and the record will come in. So you just go to the validation rule that is stopping the data from being entered and you disable it. Once you disable it, you load the data into the system, then you activate it. with data import wizard, you can trigger the workflow processes and the likes, okay? You can trigger them. But with data import wizard, you can determine whether to trigger this. You can determine whether to trigger a workflow. You can determine whether to trigger obviously, you can determine this from the user interface. But when you are loading data into the system using the data loader, the validation rule will kick in. You need to manually check this or disable it for it not to fail, okay? So you have that liberty to disable the validation rule. Once you disable it, then you can load the data, okay? In addition, when you're working with data import, you have the liberty to disable the workflow rule and the likes before you import the data into the system. So remember, validation rules prevent record from being saved, okay? One thing you should also know about validation rule is about the order of execution. The order of execution is very important. The reason why the order of execution is very important is because the order of execution determines what happens, okay? It determines how the process works, how the system checks. For instance, if you have an error on any field, when you're about to save, all the error will be checked first before Salesforce gives you a feedback. So the validation rules will kick in first, and it's going to check every field, and it's going to display all the errors on those fields. Let's go to customer. To create a customer, I need to specify an email, name, and a plan. If I click on save, the validation rule kicks in and it displays all the errors. So it doesn't work one after a time. Maybe you fix this and you say, okay, that one is fixed. It fixed this. No, it's going to give you all the errors at the same time. That means validation rules checks first and workflow rules or process builder, okay? So you need to kind of know when validation rule kicks in. When you are running a workflow rule, it's going to update the field without checking validation. So you want to make sure that you are updating the right thing in the system. When we get to workflow, I'm going to give you an example of that. You are updating the right thing in the system because once the workflow rule triggers, it assumes validation rules has taken place, okay? It assumes that and it just updates that field. So you're likely to be having a bad data in the system as a result of the workflow rule updates. So you have to be aware of that. In addition to that, this is just an example of if, let's say, you created an account in the system, and by default, no one should be able to change the BVN ID of that account. This validation rule will check if the BVN ID has been changed. If it is changed, it's just going to tell you, oh, this ID for that student has been changed, okay? And you cannot change the BVN ID, something like that. Assignment rules, fields update, field level security, can make record fail validation. What does that mean? It means if the email field is a required field, but because of maybe the design of your page layout, you've removed that email field and you try to save a record that requires the email field in the system, then the record will fail. So in as much as you are trying to minimize the number of fields that appear, as long as that field is a required field, it will fail validation, okay? So try to understand that regardless of whether a field is required, it's necessary to be on the page layout or not, as long as the field is required, then you have to display that field on the page layout so that the user can enter the data successfully. Otherwise, record insertion will fail. In addition to that, process schedule action do not trigger validation rule. What does that mean? If you have a process builder and it requires you to update a record, the validation rule will not be checked. The record will just update in the system behind the scene because it is a process scheduled action. So when you create a process builder and you have an update, make sure that the update is right, is valid for that field. Otherwise, you're going to be having a bad data in the system. Lastly, web to case, web to lead. Once you go on the website, if you create a web to case, data enters the data enters the form, and you expect the data to be created in the system. If validation rule fails, the data will not be created in the system. So remember, if you create a web to case, web to lead, and you enter bad data on the form, Salesforce will just ignore that data, meaning that the validation rule is being checked and the data is being ignored. So you need to understand that validation rule is also a form of process automation. Now, let's go into approval process. Approval process is also a type of process automation. An approval process is a type of workflow which comprises a series of steps that a work must pass to be approved. So an approval process is a type of workflow which comprises a series of steps that a work must pass to be approved. What does that mean? If you have a record in the system, let's say you have a purchase order or you have a request to send out an invoice to a customer. You want your manager to review that invoice before you send that invoice to a customer. You can use what they call the approval process. It has steps that needs to take place. The step typically would be what should happen when an approval for a record is being sent out, and what should happen if the request is approved or rejected. So let me explain. Let's say we have opportunities. Let's go to a sales app, and we have opportunities. I want to create an opportunity for a particular company, and I want my manager to approve this opportunity before I create it. The approval process will be a button whereby you can put here. Okay, so you would have what they call, you've created the opportunity, and when they send for approval, your manager or whoever is delegated to approve that opportunity would approve it. Then it's going to have another step. Whatever step you want, you can create it. At the end of that approval process, you will have what they call a rejection or a final approval. Okay, so let's go deeper into the approval process, and I will show you an example of how it works. You can set up the approval process by just specifying someone that would approve it. When you're creating a new user in the system, you typically have the manager of the user. The manager of the user is someone that would approve. Just 1 minute, yeah. Someone that would approve the user, that would approve any request sent by a user that is under the approval list. So if you have roles and you have roles hierarchy and stuff, right? You always have what they call a manager. So if I delegate the manager of this user to be, let me use my own profile so I can assign it to this user for approval. So I'm going to delegate my manager, which is my name, and my manager would be this guy. that can approve any record I send to R. Then there's also what they call delegated approver. The delegated approver is someone that can approve any submission made by Babatope. Okay? If Babatope does not have any delegated approver, the manager will be responsible. Now, there's also what they call receive approval request email. So, if you are a manager, you will receive an approval request only if I am the approver, or if I am a delegated approver, or if I am an approver or a delegated approver, or never. So you have that option to determine whether you want to receive an approval request email or not. And for the approval request email, for the process approval request, you need to have the automation settings, and you need to enable approval request response. Okay? So you need to have that enabled, and you need to have a delegated approver or a manager assigned to that user. So the manager will get an email anytime an approver is sent to them. Now, how would we carry out the approval? Let's say we have an opportunity. The first thing is you need to have a submit approval here. So you go to the opportunity layout, and you have, or you drag the approver into the page layout. Okay? You have the approver, or you drag it into the button of the page layout. This is submit for approver, and you can just put it into the buttons here. Okay? So once you have it here, you should be able to see submit for approver in the page layout of the opportunity. Okay? Once you have it set up, you will now be able to submit this opportunity for approval. When you're submitting anything for approval, there's an option to put a comment. What is the reason why you are sending this for approval? Okay? And if you click here, it's going to tell you that there's no approval process. There is no approval process because we have not set up an approver for the opportunity. The approver is a process automation, just like we have for workflow, meaning that this object is now being checked when a record is submitted for approval. The same way we have entry criteria for workflow rules, we have for approval process. Now, let's go into the slide before we demonstrate further what the approval process is. The actions and steps. What are the actions that must be carried out when a record is being sent for an approval? The actions must be defined for initial submission, final approval, final rejection, and recall. So if you submit a record right now, something must happen immediately. And that's what they call the initial submission. Then you now have other steps. You might want to create additional steps. That's subjective to the business logic they have put in place. Then you have what they call the final approval. The final approval is what should happen at the end of the approval process. Or the final rejection is what should happen at the final stage of rejection of the record. Okay, so let's go back into this and we create a very simple approval process. The approval process, just like the workflow, is found under process automation. Okay, so process automation has approver, it has the process builder, it has the workflow, it has flows. So right now we're dealing with approval processes. The first thing is you identify what objects you are setting up approval process for. So the object of interest, after that, then you can create a simple approval process using the wizard. You just say approval process for opportunity amounts. Typically you want to create something more logical, like invoice, like purchase order, like funding request. For instance, some of you guys will be working on a funding request project, and it's going to be the manager needs to approve this funding request before we can disburse it to the people that are requesting it. Okay, so we have approval process for opportunity. You need to set a criteria. Just like we have for workflow rules, you need to set up a criteria that would ensure that anytime this is submitted for approval, it is checking something. Just like your workflow rules, is checking something that meets that criteria. If it is met, then it will trigger the approval process. So let's just say when the amount is greater than $100, a very simple logic that would trigger approval process for most of the opportunity we have in the system. Okay, now select an approver. Let the submitter choose the approver manually. Automatically assign an approver using standard or custom hierarchy, such as the manager, or automatically assign based on user. So you can do this, and you have an option when you automatically assigning approver. You have this option. The first option is unanimous approver, and the first option is the first response, and the other option is unanimous approver. What does that mean? The first response is if this approval is sent out, any user, any related user, anyone that is assigned to approve this would look at. You can say, okay, this user, you look for Babatope, you add it, then you go to another user, you add it. So if any one of these users you've selected here should approve this, it means that the first process is done. Okay, that means this is being approved. However, for unanimous is everyone must approve. Everyone must approve, or if someone rejects, then the whole approval process is rejected. Okay, so first response means at least if someone out of the two people I've selected right now, if Ada approves this record, then I wouldn't need Babatope to approve it again. However, for unanimous, if by mistake, if by error or whatsoever happened, then someone rejects this record, then this entire record will be rejected. Okay, so that's just a selection for that. For this one, I will just select manager. Okay, then I save. Okay, so once I save this, then I need to now start building the approval process. So what I have just done is created the same thing we have for workflow rules, the entry criteria. And we say the entry criteria is amount greater than 100. So anytime opportunity is greater than 100, I can submit it for approval. Okay, now initial submission, what does that mean? What should happen immediately this is submitted for an approval? The record will be locked. No one will be able to edit that record. No one will be able to edit that record. Number two, you can add other things you want to happen when you submit for approval. For instance, I can create a task. Send task, please, assign to, I want to assign to my manager, okay? And my manager is Ada. Then I'll say, please approve opportunity. It could be anything, okay? It could be purchase order. It could be anything. Then you select the close date or the close date, due date for that task. You select the status of the task and you save. Okay. So now, whenever I submit an opportunity for approval and the amount on the opportunity is greater than 100, the record will be locked immediately. No user will be able to edit that opportunity record. A task should be created and it's going to be assigned to Ada, my manager. Now, this is the second stage. It's called approval steps. What's approval steps? Approval steps are a series of steps that will take place when this is being initiated. So if the manager approves, what should happen next? There is what they call approval action. Approval action is my manager says, okay, this opportunity is good to go. Rejection action. Rejection action is the manager says, I do not approve this opportunity. Okay, then you can create series of steps after, but the ultimate is the final approval or the final rejection. Okay, the final approval or the final rejection. Final approval is what should happen when this is finally rejected. Okay, and what should happen when this is finally accepted or approved. Okay, so I'm going to create another one. I will just say opportunity approval stage 2. Okay, this is just me creating a series of tasks as a result of the approval process. Okay, I save. So right now I'm at the second stage, or I'm at this approval step stage. Ultimately, when it's being approved completely, I can create different action and the likes, okay? So I wouldn't go into this much details, but remember, you have initial submission, you have approval steps, you have final rejection, or you have final approval, or final rejection, or recall action. Recall is when you recall your approval that you previously sent out, because you cannot recall the actions, right? The actions are already created, okay? Activate. So now that I've activated this opportunity approval process, I can go back to this opportunity, I refresh for it just to kick in, then I can submit for approval. Now, I believe this should be approved, okay? I submit, and now it's submitted for approval, okay? It's submitted for approval, and remember, who is my manager? The manager is Ada, okay? Ada is my manager, okay? My team manager, okay? So now I have to log in as Ada. I enable login as, I go back to the user. So now I'm logging as Ada, right? You can see Ada already has task. Please approve I opportunity. When I created that approval process, a task is automatically created for Ada, okay? And if you go to the approver request, you can see this item that is in Ada's queue to approve or reject or reassign, okay? You can either approve, reject, or reassign. If Ada approves and she leaves a comment, I have approved this opportunity. Then the next stage will kick in. The next stage will kick in based on what is happening, okay? So you will see that the approval is just a process. Just like we have for process builder, we have for workflow rules, we have for anything, it's just a process, okay? So please have that at the back of your mind that if you are designing a solution, you want to ensure that you think about something that is easier to use or out of the box to Salesforce. Don't go about using Flow for an approval process if Salesforce has already created something you can use, easily use for it. Okay? So remember, we have actions and we have process. We have steps. So going further into the approval process, you can create an approval process and it can be triggered. So initially, we've created this approval process and it was triggered as a result of actions on our quick action buttons, right? You can also trigger an approval process using flows. You can trigger an approval process using Process Builder. So if you go to Process Builder, which obviously I'm going to talk about later, you can create an approval process and the action will be submit for approval. Okay? When an invoice is created, record is greater than XYZ, submit this for approval. Okay? So we have a lot of processes in place that Salesforce has created for us to use. I'm going to put a pause here to find out how you guys are feeling and if you guys have any questions for me to address before we go into other automation tools in Salesforce. So please raise your hands up and I'll call you according to how your hands are being raised if you have any questions based on what we've learned so far, because the next one is workflow, process builder, and flow. Okay? Please unmute us. If you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, I don't think there are any questions, so I'm just going to move on. It appears probably people understand what is being taught. So I'm going to go to the next automation tool, which is the workflow. Again, I'm not going to elaborate much on workflow. You already know why we use workflow, and Salesforce is trying to phase out workflow. Okay, so you need to know workflow as part of your learning. So what is a workflow in Salesforce? Workflow rules are typically automation tools you use as a result of an action on an object. It's used to do 4 key things, which is, okay, Ramat asked hands up. Okay, I'm going to take a pause here for a minute just to see what question Ramat is asking before I carry on, okay? Ramat, unmute yourself and speak.
Okay, yeah, hello, Babatope. So what if we have 3 levels of approval and you display what you showed just now, the space provided there is just for two users. What then happens? Like example, if the CFO or the CEO and all those kind of stuff have to approve.
I believe it can add more users. Okay, it doesn't have to be 2, but you can add more users to. Let me edit. Where did I? Because once you create, you can deactivate, and you can edit the criteria. Let's just kind of like create a new process that requires an approver. So you select user, then you have row. You can have more than that. Okay. Yeah. So you can have more people as long as you want, but I think there's a limit to 10 or something. I don't know. There's a limit to 10 on what you can have. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. No worries. So let's go into workflow. You guys already know what you can do with workflow, but then again, it's part of your learning, okay? What can you achieve with workflow? What exactly is workflow? Approval process is pretty much for approving records. You are saying, I authorize this record to be sent forward, to be approved. But workflow is sort of different. Why is workflow different? Workflow is just like the steps in business. Let's say when this is completed, what should happen? That's a workflow. When a lead is created, what should happen? That's a workflow. Okay? When you're working on an opportunity, you have, I wouldn't call this a workflow, but this is pretty much a workflow. Opportunity process, the workflow, the process of closing an opportunity. So now, workflow can help you. It automates the following types of action based on a trigger. You can create tasks, send an email, update a field, and send an outbound message. Okay? So if you want to carry out a workflow, you need what they call the entry criteria. Anytime you're doing anything in Salesforce, always think about the entry criteria. The entry criteria is important because that is where your brain, that is where the solution design comes in. If I want to submit a record, what should be the entry criteria? Should it be a button? Should it be a link? Should it be when a record is created? Should it be when a record is edited? You know, you need to find out what would trigger whatever automation I need to use. Okay? When it comes to workflow rule, we have what they call the entry criteria. If you're creating a workflow rule on an account object, you would have the evaluation criteria that determines when this workflow rule will trigger. And the rule criteria will determine when if at all, you want to stop it from being executed all the time. What does that mean? It means that anytime you create a workflow rule on an object, let's say an account, anytime something happens on an account, the workflow rule will be triggered, will be processed. So it's like someone knocking at your door and you're not opening the door unless they give you the right password. That's workflow. So once you've created a workflow rule on an object, every time something happens on this object, it's equivalent to someone knocking at your door without access code. This is the access code, the rule criteria. What will make this rule work? You need to think about it because you don't want to enter into what they call a recursive loop. You don't want to enter into something that will make this rule run all the time. This is why we have criteria such as created. Created is only when a record is created, I'm going to knock at the door of this user to find out if I'm allowed to come in. Only when a record is created. And there's other option, created, and every time it is edited. This is, I would say, not so safe. However, if you are running a very delicate operation that needs to be checked all the time, then you might want to select this. However, you don't want to send out an email every time you update an account record. You don't want to send an email out every time you update a particular object. That's why you don't want to select this all the time. You might want to select this to replace this. The reason why you might want to select created and anytime it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria is it will only trigger once. So it will only be looking for the particular field which you've specified here, and that's it. Whereas for this, it will be looking for not just the field. Look at this one will be looking for the field you've specified here, if at all you have this, because you have to specify at least one. And anytime that field changed and subsequently meet the criteria. Whereas for this, it's going to be running all the time. The criteria is met. So you don't want to select this if you want to be sending an emails, okay, or creating a task. However, if your design is very delicate or you're very sensitive to the operation you're doing, then perhaps you want to select this, okay? So the workflow rule is just a simple automation tool that helps you to send, to create, to do four things: to create a task, to update a field, one field, not many fields, one field, okay? And to send an email alert. But if you're a developer, you need to know what they call the outbound message. The outbound message is in form of XML. The XML is like sending a data to an external system. So if you have outbound message created as an action, you will be able to send data to an external system, okay? So let's quickly do an example of what I will refer to as an outbound message. So I'm going to have a workflow rule, which is to send account data, okay? I want to send the account information. Anytime we load an account into the system, I want to send out the account data that we just created. Okay, anytime it's created, and I will say the account source is web. Okay, the account source is web. I click on next. So I want to create what they call an action. An action is what should happen anytime an account is created and the account source equals web. I want to send an outbound message, okay? Account XML, okay? And the endpoint is, I want to see if I can create site internally. Okay, so what's the error? Oh, so I have limited. Okay, don't worry. I'll use this, okay? I will edit this. And I don't want to use maintenance. I want to use something else. So let's see. Okay, let's use that. And I'm just testing this, okay? Normally, you would have a normal website you need to be using. You don't use, so it's saying authorize on the default, but this is not what you should be learning. But as a developer, you should know this because it's something that you will eventually do when we get into Visual Force page, okay? So it's something that you should be aware of, and we are going to go into much details when we get here, okay? Let me test this again. Yeah, we cannot. Let me just use the link. That's all I'm interested in for now. So I'll just put it here, okay? Then session ID, I want to send all this data to an external source, okay? I save. So I'll be able to send an outbound message like this, and it's going to give me this outbound message in form of an XML, and it's going to be sending that to this endpoint, okay? But then again, let's see if Salesforce enables or allow us to send data to that endpoint. Okay, so now I've activated this. Let me check the workflow rule and make sure it's been activated account data, and it's sending an outbound message, okay, to that endpoint. So if you're a developer, you would see this. You'll be able to see account data or anything. And if you kind of like, if you press enter or something like that, you get that account data, or you're going to be listening to that endpoint. Okay. So what would normally happen is you will create an account. And once you create an account, for instance, and you would have all whatever attributes, but the most important thing is web, right? The source. Where's the source field? The source field. I don't think we have source on the view. Okay, what I'm going to quickly do is change the entry criteria to, I'm going to change it to name, okay? If it is Black Force, okay? If it is Black Force, I want to send an outbound message, and maybe I want to create a task or whatever it is I want to do, right? So we can actually see that something is being done. The task should be assigned to this guy, sample task, okay? And we have one day, we have created date and that, okay? Save. And so we have at least something to test with, okay? So what is the criteria? The criteria is, let's go back to the workflow. We go to, and account name is Black Force, okay? We want the account name to be Black Force, save. And we should be good. Okay, we have that, and I'm not sending any data, but we can send other data there if you want, save. So what would not happen is that if you go to that endpoint, you will get your XML data, but because this is a Salesforce endpoint, we don't have liberty to see what's going on here. But if you can check the logs, if you are a developer, you will know how to check logs, and you will see what actually happened when you send out anything from the system. You will see all the transaction you carry, okay? So remember, you have what they call debug logs, and you also have what they call developers console, where you can also check log in real time, okay? So now that we have that, you will see that the task was also created, right? The sample task for the workflow we've just built, okay? That's simple workflow for you. But there's more to workflow than just creating tasks and sending outbound message. There's also updating a field. For instance, when you create a new lead or when you create a new opportunity, you want to have a due date for a particular time for closing this opportunity, you can just put a due date somewhere here, whereby you can use it to track the due dates, or you can create a field that will be updated as a result of maybe concatenation of the opportunity name plus the account name. It's totally up to you. But the bottom line is workflow helps you to update, not create a new record. It helps you to update this record like this, okay? There's another automation tool, which is called the process builder. The process builder is different from the workflow rules. As you can see, they perform almost the same thing. However, the process builder is much, much advanced than the workflow. The difference between the process builder, the unique or the major difference between the process builder and the workflow is that the workflow can send an outbound message, but the process builder cannot send an outbound message, okay? So if you're writing an exam, they would ask you something like that, and you should be aware of it, okay? So you have a process builder, the same way you've created the account data workflow, you can do the same thing with process builder. One of the key things here is you can determine when this process builder is executed. Remember, criteria is very important as a developer. Think about it. How should this process work? How would you like to trigger the process? This is when the record changes. A platform event, if you are communicating with an external system and is invoked by another process, if you have two processes and you want this process to be invoked as a result of an existing process, then you can select this, okay? So we have record changes, and you can determine the object of interest the same way we add for the workflow rules that let us select an account at the starting point. You can also determine the starting point of the workflow of a process. So we selected account object here as the entry, okay? The account object is the entry. Process builder is just a visual way to represent what we're doing with workflow, okay? And we select when it is created or when it is created and edited. So there is nothing like subsequently meet criteria in process builder, okay? One other thing you need to know is when you create a criteria, which is, let's say, check criteria, like what we did for the workflow, we select a name, the account name, and we say equals Black Force. One thing you can do here is you don't have to use string and code Black Force in the string like this. It is not sustainable because tomorrow the business can say, okay, do not use Black Force, use White Force or whatever it is, right? You would need to stop this process builder and you would need to clone this process builder, make changes to this process builder, and activate again, okay? Which is like 3 to 4 steps, 3 to 4 activities. As a developer, never add code anything into the system. Add coding anything into the system, we delay your process to deployment or would stop you from improving that application or development in future. Always try to find a way to use the labels if you can. So in this case, you can just use a field reference and you can use, a formula, and the formula could just be maybe a system variable, and you grab a label which you've already created, and you will use that label. How do you create labels? You go to custom labels, and you will create whatever label you want. Account name check. Remember, camel case, underscore, whatever it is, but make sure that you have a logical way of writing your name that would make sense to anyone reading it. Description is different from API name, okay? Description, you can have space and all those kind of stuff. But with API, you cannot have space, okay? It's gonna tell you you cannot have space. Underscore, alphanumeric, camel case, and the likes, okay? Then you save. So now you are checking for a name and you are referencing account name check. So if you go back to your process, the label which you are expecting would be there, but you don't, it's not gonna come up automatically because we need to refresh this page. So I'm just gonna put one there for a minute, save. Now, because the system has refreshed, you should be able to see the label. Okay, if it doesn't come, then you can just use a proper refresh on the browser. But let's try this first. Account name check. So it's there. Okay, so you're now saying account name equals a formula, which is a label. So I could have written this as Black Force, but I decided to use labels. Okay, then I save. Immediate action. Remember, I have submit for approval, which I told you earlier. So that means you can invoke another process, or you can invoke approval process. You can also invoke a flow. Okay, you can invoke a flow, approval process, and the likes within your process builder. So the process builder is similar to the workflow rules. The only difference is that with workflow rules, you can only do 4 things: email alerts, update a field, send outbound message, and create a task. With process builder, you can do a lot. You can even call your own Apex. If you start developing right now, you will see the Apex code. You will be able to call your Apex code, maybe to send an email that is customized. You'll be able to create a record, and you can do much more things. Now that we've seen the 2 processes that are very common prior to flow, let's go quickly into flow just to go through an overview of what flow is. Again, you've already done flow in your admin, and we've discussed the introduction to flow. From an app builder point of view, you just need to know how or why you should be using flow. But from the look of things right now, flow is like the real deal. Okay, so there shouldn't be a reason why you should be using flow. There should be a justification not to use flow, and I probably don't see any reason why you should be using flow. So what is flow? Flow is just a way, it's like a workflow, but a more advanced tool that can help you to improve your automation process. When you're working with flow, what you should be thinking about is inputs, logic, and outputs. What do I mean? This is a simple flow. If you look at the flow, to your left-hand side, you will see interaction. Interaction means how would you interact with the user? How would you get information from the user? You have what I call the screen flow. The screen flow helps you to get inputs from the user. You have a form wizard whereby a user will have to enter values one after the other. Then you use a screen flow to achieve that, because this is how you interact with the user. After that, you have what they call the logic. What should you process? Now that you've collected the data, what do you want to do with the data? You have a lot of options. First, you want to assign that data to a particular variable. That's what the assignment is for. Assignment is assigning the data you collect from the user to a particular variable. Or do you want to make a decision on that data? Now you have the data. Decision is a binary operation whereby you want, not necessarily a binary operation, but it's when you check for a particular criteria, the same way you work with process builder. Decision, what should happen if this is true? What should happen if this is false? The same way you have it in process builder is the same way you have it in flow. Once a decision is being made, what would happen going forward? As you can see in process builder, you immediately go to an action. An action is what you have here. With flow, you have the liberty of still messing around if you want to, or carrying out further processing. Okay? With process builder, what you need to do is maybe you want to call another process. Can you see the process of calling another process? is so long and tedious, because after you save this, you need to call another process in order to continue. With flow, you don't need to call another flow. You can carry out other logical operation, okay? You carry out other logical operation after you've made a decision, okay? Ultimately, what do you want to do? You want to manipulate data. You want to create data, update records, get records, delete records, or do whatever you want to do with data. Because at the end of the day, the reason why you're using a workflow rule is to send an email, update a field, or do whatever you want to do with the details of this record. Same with flow. You want to either create a record, update a record, get a record, or even delete that record. And there is also what they call the action. The action has to do with the things you would like to do based on the data you have, okay? I don't want to go into an example of flow right now, but this is a simple create a case flow. If you want to create a case, you design a simple flow like this, which is out of the box, or you can create your own. However, once you're done with that, you can go to the case objects, and you can go to buttons and links, and you have the option of calling whatever flow you have, which is create a flow, create a case, sorry. Then you can call it create a case button, and you say, this is the trigger point. You want to call a flow through a button. You also have the option of creating a page. You have the option of creating a page. Understand the difference between Lightning app and a Lightning page. A Lightning app, you're creating a very big, complex application, just like we have for the recruitment or the billing app. Okay? You have the billing system, which is an app, and it appears on this page like this, right? But the Lightning app is just a very simple, maybe record page, home page, and something very simple, and it's just one page. Okay? So understand the difference between the Lightning app and the Lightning app page. Okay? So let's just use app page, and we just say create a case. Okay? And the type of page we want, I'll just select one, finish. Okay? Then I go to flow. I drag my flow in there. Then the create a case page is being displayed. I activate this and I save. So you've seen how we can use our flow, okay? We've seen how to use the flow on a normal Lightning app builder page. We've seen how to use the flow on a button action. And you can also bring the flow on a page, on, let's say, this home page, for instance. If you have an existing page like this, you can use the create a case, which is the flow we've just built in the home page. So you have different options on where you can use your flow. That's the benefits of flow. Flow gives you flexibility. It gives you a lot of options. It gives you so many ways to trigger. Always remember, when you are consulting, always look for the trigger points. Don't say you can develop an automation, but look for where to start that automation, because where to start that automation is the key to development. Okay, so I'm going to take a pause here to find out if you guys are okay, if you guys have any questions, and if there's something I can address before we end the class for tonight. Okay, so please raise your hands if you have any questions regarding what we've learned, and I will be able to answer them according to how your hands will be raised up. Okay? Hi, Echo, please unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah, thank you very much, Babatope. I was just double checking though. When you showed the flow page, are those the actions that flow can actually do, like the get record, create, and delete, and all of that? Are those that we actually showed at the bottom of the page? Are those the actions that can be done by flow? Because you also mentioned there's an action exactly. Are these 5? Or there are more when you click the action in the interaction?
Oh, so this is not really action. This is more like a data manipulations, okay?
Oh, okay.
So if you want to create an action on the flow, you actually have to drag that action. So let's say, for instance, I want to create a simple flow, a screen flow, or whatever flow it is. I can now say I want to create an action. Then these are the actions that can be created on the flow. Okay. You have all these actions here. There's so much of that. There's so many of them. Even submit for approval can be created on the flow. Okay. But you should understand the difference between the action and data manipulation. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all.
Thanks. No worries. Thanks. Chairman, please.
Hi, Babatope. I wanted to ask, from your experience, has there been like an instance that your process builder did not work, even after activating and deactivating and deleting and like putting all your inputs right? Has there been that instance, and what do you do if you find yourself in that position? And is there an instance where the process builder doesn't kick in till after some days, and what possibly will be causing that?
Everything has to do with entry criteria. Okay? Entry criteria determines everything. You can test your process builder. As long as you've met the entry criteria, it will work. So you need to find out, what is your entry criteria? As you can see, our entry criteria here is check for the account name equals Black Force. If the entry criteria is fine, check if the process builder is activated. If the process builder is not activated, it might not work. Check if there is condition. Conditions are met or formula evaluates to true. So you need to know whether you are selecting all conditions to be met, or you say formula evaluates to true. So if you have like 3 conditions here, and you're selecting all conditions to be met, if one is right and the other is not right, then it will not trigger. Okay? So always take a step back and check your criteria before you condemn your process. Okay? So what I would normally do is clone that same flow and take everything off besides just one criteria, and I will test. Then I'll add the next one, then I will test. Then I'll add the next one, I will test. That's how to ensure that you're not missing anything, okay? In terms of what other things I would do, I cannot think of anything right now, but one thing I know usually happens is sometimes it's just not activated, okay? So always check that it's activated and the entry criteria conditions are actually specified clearly. All meaning that everything you state here must be true or must match. Any means that any of them, and obviously customized logic is more advanced, maybe 1 or 2, 3, and 4, and the likes. Okay, so that's what I would check normally, and hopefully that helps.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Babs, can please unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah, thank you so much again, boss. Mine is basically a request. I know the last time you were able to give us some of the slides, I know they're high level, but they're also very helpful
It's 9
in
o'clock.
terms of revision and looking at the thought process that you have in writing.
Okay, this is actually a developers class, but I would try to. I would try to send it to consultants as well, but it's a developers class, right? But let's see, that's not a problem. I will send it out to you guys. Okay.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you for everything.
No worries, good stuff. So, guys, I think that's all. Developers, we are just warming up. We are just warming up. Right now, when I go into coding, I will not be explaining all this again. You've now learned this stuff twice, meaning that you should be hot. And please, developers, try to understand that this is preparing you to be a good developer. So your time for the next 8 weeks with me to be spent on Salesforce only. The Scrum training will be happening very soon. Please do not focus on other things right now. It's very important you focus on development, otherwise you will miss it. And if you miss it, you will struggle. So please try your best to focus on Salesforce for the next 8 weeks. This is life-changing for you. If you've signed up for developer and you're still in this class, it means you have a bright future. Trust me, you just need to focus. If you are focused in the next 8 weeks, you will be amazed. However, if you want to go read videos from BA, videos from this, you'll be lost and you wouldn't know why you enrolled into this program. A lot of people are giving me excuses. It's okay. It's okay to give me excuse, and I'm okay with that. I cannot force you to become a developer. I cannot. It's not about money this time around. It's about completing what you start. And we've not even started anything coding-wise. So my expectation from you is you should take 1 hour before the class starts and go through what we're going to be doing in class that day, and 1 hour after the class ends to go through again what we've learned for that day. That's the only way you can grow. And after 8 weeks, you can come back to me and say, Babatope, I spent 4 hours every day, Monday to Thursday, Friday, and I did not see a result. Then I will check your profile. I will see if you've actually made that commitment, if you've done that assignment, if you've done that tutorial, then we can now have a conversation. But if you haven't done it, you would also see the outcome of your disobedience. Trust me, everything I do is working, but you just need to obey. That's the only way you can get the reward. Having said that, I'm going to publish your test, which is a test of quantitative analysis of just simple GMAT question like scenario. You need to get at least 75%. The screenshot of your performance will be uploaded on the Blackforce. I will not send the test out right now, but I will give it out by Thursday, and you have to submit that test by Friday, okay? By next week, we're going to be working on App Builder certification, and after next week, we're going to start the platform developer. Again, it's your call, but please try to be focused and don't go about looking for jobs or attending other people's classes or watching other videos that is not required for you right now. If you struggle during the JavaScript class, please take your time to watch the videos again. That's the only way you can reinforce your knowledge, okay? Don't watch other people's video. Focus on development for the next 8 weeks, please. I think that's all from me. Take care of yourself, and I'll speak with you guys tomorrow. Bye, everyone.